Hello, everyone, and welcome to the English Association's podcast. Today, we have two very special guests with us, both authors with saga fiction. We have with us CL Peache and Sacha T.Y Fortuny. They're both authors that dabble in a lot of genres. Sacha specifically writes women's fiction, romance, and young adult novels. CL Peache writes genres such as chick lit and thriller. Some of their books are available on Saga Fiction and you can find them on the app. So, Sasha, Claire, thank you so much for joining us today. To begin our dialogue, I'd just like to pose the first question, which is what has your journey as an author been like?
You want to go first? Or?
I'm sure. I am a self-published author until I guess I met Akriti at Saga Fiction and then became part of the author team on Saga. I have written and published 3 women's fiction romance novels, and also a short story collection. I also have a few that, I've never gotten published and I hope they do someday. I have lots of short stories, There's always something about being a writer that you have all these little babies you have out there and you don't always show them to the world. So I do want to push more eventually. And I'm hoping that, Saga or whatever the case may be, it gets there. I've always been writing, always as a little kid, you have all these stories and this imagination that you just don't know where to put that energy. And I think I speak for all writers in the sense that they are your friends, your characters, they are your parts of you that you want to share and you want to have others experience. I don't know if it's the same for you. Was it Claire, CL?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I came late to writing, really. I didn't start writing until 2018. So I'd always been an avid reader, but not really sort of written anything seriously. And then I decided, come on, give it a go. See if you've got a book inside you. You can do it. And and never stopped since. And yeah, it is very much about the characters. You want to share them and their stories, and you want to tell that in the best way possible. So yeah, I agree with that. I used to listen to authors talking about characters dictating what was happening. I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. You're the writer, decide what they're going to do, but you can't. They just take over and do exactly what they like.
I think it's definitely true that the world is its own in your head and you really can't build it. It feels like it's already existing, right? And I think Claire, it's interesting to see that you started when you did because a lot of people worry that there is a wrong time to be an author, and there never really is. There's always a time to write.
No, I think you just probably, I mean, like I said, I've always been an avid reader. I've always got 3, 4, 5 books on the go in some way, shape or form. And so all those things have, been, all the little ideas have probably always been there. It's just that I've never decided to sit down and write. So I think, I see on Twitter, there's people that have not started writing until they're in their 60s, till they've maybe retired and they've got that time to do it, because it does take a lot of time and a lot of energy, and especially to self-publish or try and get a publisher. It's a lot of time. So you have to be sort of prepared for that when you go into this writing game. It's it's not easy.
So, what do you think being authors is the best part of your job?
You want to go, Sasha?
I think for me, it's when, you get, I don't want to say a fan, but a reader that just really understands your characters, Yeah. As human beings, we always get misunderstood. But when you've written a character that someone can defend and say, oh no, that's why he did that, and I'm so with you, and they get so involved, and that makes me feel like, wow, as a writer, in terms of I've created, someone that has that duality that, another person can interpret and understand and side with and be there when you write women's fiction and romance and someone just really gets it. That to me is the best part. I don't know if it's the same for all writers, but that is what drives me to continue writing.
I think so. I'd agree. I think it is a really lovely feeling when someone does get your character and what you're trying to say, or even the hidden bits of the character. I mean, I do quite like writing baddies. I've got this real thing for writing serial killers. And even if someone hates your character, if you want them to hate it, that's just as good as someone really liking your character as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bouncing off of that, I think with social media and the kind of digital publishing platforms we have now, feedback and audience engagement is very, very immediate. So, how do you like to engage with your audience?
I mean, I'm always on social media. I'm a bit terrible for it, really. I keep getting told off and being told to put my phone down. Yeah, I think it's very important. I like it. I mean, when I'm on social media, if I'm fangirling on an author, it's so exciting when they tweet you back or you get a message or a like or something. And it's nice to have that connection because it makes you want to buy their work more when you know them as a person, I think. So, I mean, obviously social media has its bad side, but for me, I think, especially in the reading and writing community, it's very supportive.
Yeah. I think as well, I've also made it a point to, engage other authors. I've done reviews for other authors and tagged them and said, this is what I love about their book. And, kind of just, it is a community that you need to be supportive because I think, and I've said this before on like Saga interviews, writing can be very, isolating because you're the one, you're in your head. It's important to connect with other writers as well as readers and just have that community and have people that have your back and understand when you say, I am stuck, I have writer's block, my characters are leading me in this direction, or I don't want to talk to them today. People that really, really understand what you're going through. And I think, the writing community can be very supportive in that. On social media, that has been, part of the thing that I like about using Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or not really Twitter so much for me personally, but I know there's lots and lots of communities that have been built from the possibilities of social media.
I think finding, I started self-publishing. I still self-publish as well as reading Saga fiction. But you find a lot of, publishers on there as well. It's a way for authors to find someone to take their work on, which you couldn't do before social media. You'd have to send it. I mean, you still do a bit of it now, but you'd have to. Back in the day, you'd have to send a letter off. Wait months for it to come back or an email. So it is a way of engaging as well. I mean, I know authors that have found a publisher because they've engaged with them on social media.
Yeah. They also have things like, I've seen Twitter have pitch wars where you tag like a publisher. I'm like, this is amazing for you to get your book down to a few words. I haven't done it personally because it seems insane, but I know there have been writers that have found their audience or they've built their audience from social media and they have that background to say, listen, I have a market that I can publish to. This is my people. Can you get me all the way there? So it's been amazing for those writers that have found that as part of their journey. I think that's really good.
Definitely, and I think there's a lot of changes that have come about in publishing itself, which is crazy to see because just the idea of, having that physical manuscript and e mailing it to people, like you said, Claire, and how immediate and quick the response has to be now, whereas you could leave people waiting for days, months on end when it came to before the internet. Not that I know much about before the internet, honestly. um, so, when you're talking about a community and engaging with authors, and I completely understand when you say that writing is such an isolating thing, right? So, what do you think about how have you found your favorite authors at the moment, and who are they?
Sure. So I think last year for me personally, I decided to go into reviewing in a big way. So I signed up for all of these ARC programs, Readsy, there's Book Sirens, a whole bunch of them. And I decided, okay, I'm going to read this year because the prior year, as we all know, was COVID. I read almost nothing for the entire year. So last year I read, and I kept a track, 138 books. And I found really, really good authors that I would never have read otherwise through some of these programs. And I think that for me was like mind-blowing. There's so much writing out there. I mean, ones that don't come from the mainstream media that, tells you these are the authors, these are the top 10. There's so many, unknown writers that, unknown to me at least, that I've found in the last year alone. And things that surprised me, like I liked reading biographies. I didn't even know this until I read some that were, moving. There was one, an author, Tom Creffer, who did parenting and being a dad. That was shocking to me that I enjoyed it so much. There was Chandra Hoffman, I believe is her name. She wrote 2 books that I reviewed and they still stay with me, The Summer After and What Pretty Gets You. And there's just so many that touched me last year. And I'm happy that I have new favorites, because I think before that everyone calls out, okay, Jodi Cole and Stephen King. Everyone has like the list that they always go through. These are my favorites. These are the ones that people tell me to read. And no one told me to read the books that I read last year, and I found so many that I enjoyed. So I'll hand it over to Claire.
Well, I've often in the past, haven't done it for a while because, like you said, the last 2 years have been a bit strange of reading, and also because I've been getting a few books published. Of course, that takes up a lot of your time editing and various other things. So the reading falls off a little bit when you've got to read your own books 30,000 times before you publish it. But I normally do like a Goodreads challenge or something like that, where you'll say read 50 books, but it will give you specific types of books to read. So read a book that was published in, before 1950, say, or, so it sort of forces you to read books that you don't normally read, which is really good. I found so many interesting books through doing this, and also being part of a book group, because I don't choose the books usually. I end up reading something I wouldn't normally, and I really enjoy it. So, I mean, I have my favourites like Dean Koontz, who's a thriller writer. I've got all of his books, and they're nice. And but yeah, I think, and also I work with the Newark Book Festival in the UK, and so part of that I get to see some sneak previews of books and discover many other authors that way. So.
There's a lot of interesting ways to find new things, and also it's the accessibility of books now is a lot better than it used to be. And I think I have read a lot of classics recently just because of things like Project Gutenberg and how easy and it's there's no cost at all, right? The only thing you do is engage with an author that existed ages before you, and it's so interesting to see what life would have been like, right? And I think that books and fiction have become such an important part of who we are as people, because especially with the whole COVID thing, right? We're like we're practically begging for worlds to escape into at this point. So I think despite it being a strange year for reading, there's still, I think, such a growth of readers, and with different kind of fiction popping up, we have an ever increasing market, just because, as I know, my generation, we have no attention span truly. So it's stuff like flash fiction, short stories. They're all very, very big for us because we don't have to spend ages sitting through a book. And as much as I love doing that, sometimes you need a quick fix, truly.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because obviously with Saga Fiction, with them doing the episodes and everything else that they do, and I think particularly when I've been writing, because I follow a lot of authors and I watch a lot of author interviews and publishers, there is that trend towards shorter chapters. And I think that's influenced me when the books I've been writing, because you want to tap into that market, you know, of people wanting those shorter, sharp chapters so they can read it in between. So, yeah, it's interesting the way it's sort of developed, and you know, and it is so immediate now, like you say, with, you know, literally you could write a book in the morning, you could publish it in the afternoon on an ebook. You literally could that quick. It's amazing, isn't
I think with the digital market and mainstream publishing having other alternatives to it, there's also an increase in things like representation in books, right? And you see a lot of people that I don't think I've seen in, say, canon literature. So
it?
I think even you, Claire, wrote a book with a main character that's has a disability, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who are seeing themselves in media now that never really had a chance to do so.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that, and why do you think it's so important to people who are younger and people who are getting into reading now?
Well, I think you've got to, I think as an author, you look around at environments, things that happen, at the people who you see on a day-to-day basis. So I think whenever when I write characters, they tend to just come and they are who they are. It's not a case of me making them be something because it might be seen as being popular to write a certain kind of character. I can't really change that. That's just who they are when they pop in my mind, and you know. But it is important that everyone's reflected within books, because that's normal life. If you don't include them, you're excluding people who we see on a day-to-day basis.
In addition to that, as you mentioned it, I also have the same thing when my characters are perfectly formed before I even begin. And I know I've seen like a lot of writers groups. There are some writers that are saying, okay, so I am a white person. I want to write a person of color. Give me some tips. And
Yeah.
I'm just, you know, those things, I guess it makes other writers feel uncomfortable, because it's like, can you write from the experience?
Mm-hmm.
You know, those are the kind of topics that I think are really important to, you know, have among the writing community, because there's always going to be someone who is, for instance, the person of color that says, listen, just don't write it. And I'm like, can you give writers the rules? Don't write this, don't write that. This is not your experience. Or can we open it up to, you know, your imagination? What do you have permission to write? Can you write from, you know, a person who hasn't had a disability? Those kind of things. So one of the books that I've read as well last year, there was an author that spent 4 years researching, you know, what is it like to be a blind person? And she really went into it to really understand, okay, how can I speak from this perspective? And that type of research, I think, is so important if you are gonna, you know, write something that isn't your natural, you know, state of being. And I was really impressed that, you know, she went to that extent. And some of these things she mentioned, I was like, wow, I never thought about that. So those things I think are really, really critical when we do open it up to all the abilities and all the races and all the cultures, just to make sure that, you know, you do your research, you do, you know, have someone on your writing team that's gonna check you, because otherwise you may not, I don't want to say embarrass yourself, but maybe just not represent the community you want to honor with your words, you know.
I definitely agree. And being someone who's been a part of this debate on the internet a lot, it's just that one thing I read was that you should definitely have characters who are diverse in your work, but it should never, if you're not a part of that community, it should never be about the thing that makes them diverse. So if you're a queer person, you shouldn't be writing about what it is like to be queer, but you should have queer people in your work. And I think things like that are so important in casual representation itself. We're not discussing your diversities. We're not discussing what makes you different. It's just a part of you, and it's just what you are, who you are, and you're a person that exists in our world.
I do like that point that you made, you know, in terms of the casual representation, because I think that is what's missing in a lot of this, you know, conversation about diversity. It's not about, you know, writing someone totally that's all about what they're representing. They can just exist. We people do exist in the world without everything having to be about the difference. You know, you can be a person of color and won't mention that every day. You can be a queer person and still have relationships with friends. It doesn't have to be, this is my boyfriend, my girlfriend. It doesn't always have to be about what is diverse about me. It can be just natural. I exist in this world. You know, I have a colleague that's, you know, a man talking about his husband. So I like those ways of interspersing the reality to make sure that, you know, we do have representation, even if it's not necessarily all about the difference. I like that point. That's a good point.
Yes, welcome back, Claire. I think you had some technical difficulties. But what I do with representation, what I do feel also as a person of color and someone who's engaging in a lot of queer discourse, it's important for people to see themselves just exist instead of exist in traumatic situations. A lot of queer films are about coming out or their partners dying or just a lot of sadness and trauma that does exist for queer people out there, but I think it's important to show them casually and show them just as people who have relationships, people who have lives just the same, right?
Sorry, I
Yes.
dropped out a little bit. That my internet decided to shut off
No worries.
completely.
Yes,
We all
we've all
understand.
been dealing with this since 2020, so I think it's
I know everyone's so used to it, aren't they? Now we one stage we
Guilty.
would have panicked, but now we're like, oh, the internet's gone.
Yes, we were just talking about representation. So I think it's really great that there's a lot of authors like you and you two who are bringing about people just in casual situations and making their lives about their lives and not about their diversity. Casual representation in my head is very, very, very important. One more question I'd like to ask is, so what do you think, would you say, is your process when it comes to ideation? I know, Claire, you said that characters just pop into your head sometimes, and you both agree that sometimes they just direct the story for you. But is there a point where you would sit down and flesh out a story, and how does that work for you?
So normally I'll come up with an idea. It'll just pop in my head. Then the characters there, and I'm very lucky because other than in my fantasy series where because there's lots of threads and things going on, so I had to sort of build a backstory as well as writing it. Normally it's just there in my head and I just write it, and I very rarely, I'm not a planner, I don't sit down and plan what I'm going to do. I just sit at the computer and it all comes out. So I'm quite lucky. I need to find a way just to download it straight from here to the PC, then I don't have to type it.
We all want that. I've had books that never got written. They're in my head, and I just
Yeah.
yeah. For
You see,
me,
I have to nowadays, I've found the trick with that is if I write about 2,000-ish words of a story that's in my mind, it sort of takes it out a little bit, and then it's not nagging me to write it, and then I know I can come back to it at some point. So I tend to do that. If I've got an idea, I'll write a little bit, and then hopefully the characters leave me alone for a while so I can actually work on what I'm supposed to be writing and then come back to it later.
yeah, I mean, for me, because I think like my first book that I published was in my head for like 15 years. It was existing for about, you know, about 5 or 6 versions before it actually got published. And then even after publishing, it was published again like 2 or 3 times. That's what happens with self-publishing. You get the opportunity to revise. And then when Saga came on board, it got even more streamlined. So the story kind of gets whittled down to its essence. But in terms of the process, like my characters, they just kind of appear. they just they just know exactly who they are, and there are things that I would have liked to see happen, and it just didn't happen because the character said, "Nah, that's not me. That's not."
It's so frustrating, isn't it? You really want it to go in a certain direction. I know with one of my books, I got right to the end and I knew what was going to happen at the end. I had it fixed, and then literally the last chapter, the characters are like, no, we're ending the book this way.
That has happened to me as well, because especially as I write, women's fiction, romance, you have a kind of idea of who your characters are supposed to be, and a fully fleshed version of them. And then at some point along the way, they just decide to do something you're not happy with. And you have to include it. You can't just leave it out. If someone cheats, or someone says something really hurtful, or someone just goes to that dark place that your readers are going to be like, oh, but I can't not make it happen. I don't have that control to change the story, because it's always going to feel like I wasn't being honest to who they are, and I can't change the narrative at a certain point. There's some things you have control over, and then some things I just couldn't change.
I think the readers would be able to tell, though, don't you think? I think if you forced it to go in a direction that it wasn't supposed to, I think readers would be able to tell.
Yeah, and like for me, even when Saga had made edits, made edits to draft, and said, okay, well, are you happy with this change? Some things I said, yeah, this sounds a lot better, and other things I'm like, I can't change this. This is just how it is, how it happens. I'm really amused recently. You've seen a particular author we all know of the Harry Potter series, who said, this was supposed to happen, but it just didn't happen. She's like, this one was supposed to end up with and so on. And everyone's like, but didn't you write it? No. That's not how it happened. Writers know better.
I think it's crazy to see how characters can truly be living, breathing things in one's head, right? They're people to you. They're not words on a page. And I think a lot of people fail to understand that, but a lot of people have their own versions of your character in their head. And I think that's why the internet is so exciting. Fan fiction is a huge thing, and people can write their own narratives and put themselves into your story, which we all used to do in our heads at one point, but now people want to read that. So it's really interesting to see things like that. What I'd like to ask is, as a person who's dreamt of writing myself, just to our listeners in university, what do you think you would give or say to someone who wants to be a writer? What advice would you give to someone who's been thinking about this and wants to take the plunge?
Well, I think from my point of view, because it took me so long to do it, just sit at your PC and start writing, or have your notebook and start writing. Just go ahead. Don't be scared. No one's going to read it unless you show it to them, and no one's going to be able to read your book unless you write it. So I would say just do it. Just enjoy the process. You, like I say, you don't have to show anyone your work until you're ready. So write the book, then edit it, then put it away for a little bit, and then get it back out again and write it a little bit more. But I think the main thing is don't be scared to give it a go, and enjoy it, because every author, I think, has felt the same. They've been scared to write, scared to show it to somebody. What's everyone going to think? We all have imposter syndrome. I think even authors that have written 30, 40 books feel like that. So just give it a go. Be brave. You can do it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I just want to add to that. I know one of the things about being a writer is about like getting support. Some writers really feel like, okay, even if they've written, even if they've published, especially if they've published something and their friends and family haven't read it or don't seem to want to be a part of that side of them. It's just you have to write for yourself. At the end of the day, you can't think too much about, I want to write and everyone has to read my book. No, everyone doesn't have to read your book. You have to be happy with what you've written, what you've put out there, what you've published, if you've published anything, even if not. And don't get too hung up on, the support, because the support may not come from your closest friends and family. It may come from your fans, your readers. There will always be a reader, a fan for what you are writing. You always have someone. They always say there's a match made in heaven for everyone in terms of romance. there's a match made for your writing. There is a reader out there,
Yeah.
even if you're not the most popular writer, even if it takes you a while to get to the status you'd like to be. There is always someone who will love what you've put out and appreciate what you've contributed to the, I guess, the literature world. So hang in there, and you will make it. Just as you said, just put your mind to it, and no one has to see it until you're ready. But just write.
I think that's all really great advice that we've received. I think it's a scary prospect to put your work out there, and I think I agree with you don't know if you'll get support, you don't know is this going to be it. But I think when you're writing, you have to fall in love with what you've written. And that's the only way I think truly that you'll be able to put everything down on a page. And I know I struggle with starting something and then giving up halfway through, and I think a lot of people do. But it's you have to have the devotion to come back to something that you've written and love it so much that you just can't leave it there, right? What I wanted to ask is what are some upcoming projects that you're excited about? This is we're not going to any promotions. Basically, what is a project that you're working on maybe right now or is in the works or you have been thinking about for a really long time that you can share?
Do you want to go first?
Sasha, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'm really excited about getting the
My
rest of my book.
internet's uh, my
Oh,
internet's going a little bit funny.
okay, sure. I have one book that's currently out on Saga, and the other two will be, edited down a bit and cleaned up for Saga as well later this year. So I am excited about getting those out, and also I have a short story I've written, which is coming up pretty soon for I think it's a spring collection. They told me to write something for. Now, I usually write things with a bit of a dark twist or things that are not very happy. So I was surprised when I wrote this story and it had a really happy ending. You never know where your writing is going to take you. So it's a heartwarming story that really made me think, okay, Sasha, you're not a dark person. You can write something that is happy about healing. You can write something that is positive and leaves everyone with a smile on their face. I'm thrilled to be able to contribute that little short story that took me in a direction which was happier than my normal process. I was happy about that. So I'm looking forward to what Claire's got coming up as well, because I know she's got quite a lot.
Yeah, so I've got so Power of Nature is my next one that's going to be coming out with Saga Fiction. So that's exciting. That's coming up in the next sort of 2-3 weeks. So that's going to be available on Amazon and Kobo, I believe. So that's really exciting. And that's sort of a mystery thriller. And then I'm just self-publishing the second in my fantasy series, Festival of Time. So that's hopefully going live next weekend. Fingers crossed. And then I've got another couple more to publish with Saga Fiction, but they're just in sort of editing phase at the moment. Once all that's tied up, I want to get back to my original first book that I wrote, which was sort of about a serial killer thriller. So quite excited to go back to them eventually. Yeah, so always lots on the go.
That is amazing to me. You can jump from something that's heartwarming to, murder. That is really impressive.
Well, I think it stems from, I think, reading so widely. I like to read all sorts of different genres. So I sort of think, well, why would I only stick to one? Why don't I have a go and write whatever? And like we said as well, the characters dictate basically what you write. Really, you don't get too much of a choice what genre you're going to write in. But if they come along, they're going to be written.
But I have to say, all of this sounds really exciting, and I think the amount of writing that you do it and the work that you've done is so interesting. And I've read parts of both of your work on Saga, and I have to say, I'm a little bit hooked. So I'm excited to see what else you've got coming up. And I think that just it's so exciting to see authors like you, just your work and see what could be done with this kind of platform, right? And I have to say, Decisions is the one I explored for you, and the short story collection Amalgamated Darkness is both. I've read parts of both, and I'm so excited to see what comes next. It's really addictive. You're writing, I have to say. And I think this discussion has been such a learning experience for me, and I'm guessing for all of our listeners eventually. And I'm really excited and really thankful that you decided to give us your time today. And I think it's just been a wonderful experience and a wonderful talk, from representation, accessibility, to what you're working on, why you do what you do. So I think there's been a lot of great points today, and thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I just wanted to let our listeners know that you can find Sacha and Claire on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I will be putting their links in the description. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm so thankful that I got to have this discussion with you and got to be exposed to wonderful women who are writing, who are making their way through this industry. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me and Claire. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you everyone for listening, and that was our podcast for today.